He says COVID-19 has affected each of the very many people living in Suffolk and North East Essex. He says 1 million in very different ways. And those different ways mean we need to pay attention to one another, how each of us feel, and how we can build from our experiences of the past year. We all need to think about how do we heal? How do we heal our NHS services? How do we heal our social care sector? How do we heal our health and care workforce? How do we heal our communities? How do we heal ourselves? And as we have learned through this time of the inequalities in our society, how to help everyone to heal. Healing is physical, mental, social, and through it all, spiritual. A healing of memories and meaning. A couple of what might be called prayers. One is a prayer for our community. We are not people of fear, we are people of courage. We are not people who protect our own safety, we are people who protect our neighbours' safety. We are not people of grief, we are people of generosity. We are God's people, giving and loving wherever we are, whatever it costs, for as long as it takes, wherever God calls us. God of love, as we think about all that has changed this year, help us to trust that you are always with us. As we remember those who have died, help us to trust they are at peace with you. As we reach out to others with kindness and care, may hope shine out in every heart and home. Amen.
Amen. Lovely to see you here. My wife and I have been talking about how many 100 people will be here to listen to us today. This is fine. This is fine. We look forward to the hundreds next year. I am talking to you about Zanzibar, and for those of you who haven't made it to the front yet, these are images of Zanzibar, which I decided to do non-electronically, because I've been in too many events where the electrics or electronics have failed. And I spent the last 2 hours being the in-house electrician for this place. So I'm sort of glad I had this. But I'll point to some odd things as we go along, and then there are some more pictures here. I have met one person here already, Farooq, who has been to Zanzibar, and 3 people in Zanzibar. This gets better all the time. Is anyone else? No, right. Well, Zanzibar may say spy silence to you, in which case that would be correct. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you have any idea where it is. So I'm going to make the assumption that a lot of you don't know where it is. It's on the east coast of Africa. It's below the Horn of Africa, so we come down Somaliland, Kenya, then Tanzania, and it goes on. And there, on the eastern side of Africa, there are 3 major ports there. The first one you come to is Mombasa, and the second is Dar es Salaam, and the third further on down is Beira in Mozambique. And right by Dar es Salaam, just offshore, literally there's a sort of fast boat that gets you from one to the other in 20 minutes, is the island of Zanzibar. It's 6 degrees south of the equator. That's the other thing I like to. It's very close to the equator. That means it suffers from monsoon seasons, but also plenty of heat. And if you're trying to work it out, I was just trying to figure out 6 degrees south of the equator. What does that really mean? How can we identify that here? So if you say that the equator is, for the sake of argument, at John O'Groats in this country, then Zanzibar would just happen to be in Newmarket. So it's that distance, 360 miles different distance. Now, why am I talking about Zanzibar? The first answer to that question is because I used to live nearby in Zanzibar, in Dar es Salaam. I was born in Uganda, in Kampala, and then we moved to, way back in 1956, to Dar es Salaam. And from there we went to another port, we went up to Mombasa, and then I spent many years living in Nairobi, Kenya. Before we were thrown out, as happens with great ceremony in lots of countries, but we spent a long time there, so it was fine. The second answer to your question was, I mean, you grow up with a place, so you have an affection for it, and we didn't resent being thrown out of Africa. It was time for us to go. But what did surprise me was, later on, I was, for 7 years until last year, I was the administrator, which is the same as, if you like, the chief executive of Ely Cathedral. Ely Cathedral has a relationship, a twin relationship with Zanzibar Cathedral. And the chapter thought it would be a good idea if I went there, because I could probably connect with them in some way. They thought I was sufficiently daft I would do that. And it wasn't until I actually arrived in Zanzibar that I discovered that no one at Ely Cathedral had read my CV and didn't know about my history. So they also didn't know that I spoke Swahili, which is kind of fun because on a Sunday morning there are 2 services in Zanzibar Anglican Cathedral. It starts off in the morning with an English service, and then there is another one in Swahili, which is much more fun than services in this country. I'm sure that I'm saying. So what does that cathedral, I'll start there, what does that cathedral look like? It looked like that. It's sort of bright pink, which is the sort of customary colour of paint covering that they put on Zanzibari buildings. Before that was refurbished recently, it looked like that. That is all grey. And that would also explain perhaps that the Catholic cathedral in Zanzibar, which is grey down there as you might see, is not grey because no one's looking after it. But there's something else going on there, and that is that there is a fungus that afflicts all the buildings in Zanzibar, so the streets are all grey as well, because of the heat, basically. But the fungus is said to also protect the fabric of the building, the covering of the building. So within a year and a half after that, this job was completed, it was grey again, which is a bit of a shame. However, it is what it is. But the reason I'm really talking is not to do a travel for you, but to tell you that it is utterly inspirational from my point of view. It is a mixed community living together successfully in a way that I've never seen before in all the other places I've lived in the world, and that includes a lot in Far East. So let's just start with who are these mysterious people there, the Zanzibaris. 94% of them are Muslim. That's 925,000 people. And they are mainly of assorted ethnic backgrounds. They are from Africa, from the Arab countries, and the South Asian countries. And I'll explain how they got there. So 94% are Muslim, 3% are Christians, and then about 3%, another 30,000, are Hindus, Goans, Sikhs, Parsis, and one or two other bits and pieces. I have no idea whether there are any Baha'i there, but I suspect there are, but I haven't met any. But those of the Indian diaspora would have come there as engineers, builders, and businessmen, which was very much the case with with Dar es Salaam as well, and Mombasa and Nairobi. And from there, they found their way all the way up to Lake Victoria. There are on Zanzibar and one of its close islands, two tiny indigenous African tribes, the Hadimu, who originally did inhabit Zanzibar Island, and then the tiny island, which is called Tumbatu. And the people there are the Tumbatu, which sounds like a good idea. Stick to what you know. Now, you may be surprised that I haven't talked about the Swahili tribe. Or maybe you won't. Maybe you just think Swahili is a language. But actually it's the name of a tribe. And it's of the language we know of, because when all sorts of foreigners started to arrive in Dar es Salaam, to trade and to trade slaves and so on, they needed to speak an African language. Just north of Dar es Salaam, on the coast, there is a small tribe called the Swahili. And so it's their language that was adopted, first of all by the Arab traders, then by the Europeans who were coming in, mainly British, for trading purposes, for exploration and for the slave trade. But there was no one there to really counter the notion that Swahili should be the language that we adopted. And there's a reason for that. It's a very simple, very basic language. So for us as foreigners to learn a bit of Swahili was quite easy. The problem was that it was a small tribe. Small African tribes have very limited lexicons rather. And so actually there was this extraordinary symbiotic relationship between them and us, the foreigners, which is that we taught them stuff to add to their languages. And so that meant that Swahili, as we got to know it, was actually partly Arabic, partly English, and I'll give you some examples a little later, and partly Swahili. But it was important that there should be that relationship. The other reason, then people know that they could go there and communicate and trade. The other reason that life developed as it did do in Zanzibar was that all the way down that East African coast there is a reef just offshore, and there are very few breaches in the reef. One of them happens to be at Mombasa, which has a lovely natural harbour in there, Kimindi Harbour. The second one is, you guessed it, at Zanzibar / Dar es Salaam. Dar es Salaam has, again, a lovely natural harbour, and Dar es Salaam, but Zanzibar has one on the island, which is protected, provides shelter, particularly from the monsoon. And so it got a different kind of trading relationship there from Dar es Salaam. It's people who wanted to get new land, whereas Zanzibar was a stopping off point from the sea. And then onwards you go down to Beira again, where again there's a gap in the reef and over to South Africa. But there were these two things happening in close proximity. The town in Zanzibar that developed was built of stone, and it became known as Stone Town. I suppose that's entirely beautiful. That's what it's still known as. That's the capital of Zanzibar. Whereas this bigger place where you could get protection from the storms, but also trade, Dar es Salaam means haven of peace in Arabic. And that's what it's still known as. Why did people come there? Well, there was easy access for small vessels, such as dhows, coming over from Arabia, India, Ceylon, Mozambique as well, and South Africa, with onward mainland access up to Lake Victoria, which then led to about 5 other countries. So that was the big draw. And then, let's not beat about the bush, Zanzibar became the major slave market for Eastern Africa. When slavery was abolished, however, many captured Africans who were awaiting export on the slaving ships were just left. And many of them came from hundreds of miles away in Africa and didn't know how to find their way back. And there are quite a lot of people in the slave trade were made redundant, put on permanent furlough or something. And they didn't know how to get out and get their rights, so they stayed. And then there were those who had been there long enough to say, we want this to continue to be our home, so they stayed. So you had three groups of people, really. The Indians hadn't yet arrived, professionals who could help with engineering, roads and all sorts of things. But the Arabs, the Europeans, mostly English, and then these Africans who would not have been from the island itself. It was a tiny tribe there. They were people who were brought in to be slaves and to be transmitted onwards, and a lot of them stayed. And they can tell you all about that. So, as a result of that, it became very suddenly a multi-ethnic community. What did they survive on? The reason I ask the question is, it's not a very fertile place, Zanzibar. In fact, it's a bleached coral reef. There's really nothing there but coral, dead coral. And so there is now some earth that's developed over the years, but there's very little that grew naturally. But some things did. Coconuts always do, and coconuts, copra, coir, always found a market abroad. Spices grew, not all of them, but quite a lot, and things like cloves in particular. And then the other thing that enabled these people to survive until they built something new was, of course, fishing. So the familiarity with dhows in particular was a boon to them. That's what they lived off. So if that's what it takes to build a community, really? Is that all that's needed? Well, I think the short answer is no. Give and take is also a key to successful community building. It's about what you have and I want, and what I can do for you, whoever you are and you want. And doing it not as a way of demanding, but of actually working together and helping to create a community. So the examples that I'll give you, that are very live examples nowadays, are the provision of schooling, and that came mainly from the Catholic Church and the Anglican Church missionaries who set up schools there. Business connections with other cultures. So if you're in Africa, in Zanzibar, you want to connect with France, Germany, Britain, Far East. You think you can do it on your own? No, but some of those people that have been training can. So that's another thing that must give and take. Access to other cultures, people of other cultures and other markets. But the other thing that's necessary is you may recognise that there are other cultures, other communities, other religions, but you've also got to be tolerant. Wow, that's a big word in Cambridge University at the moment, where people were told to be tolerant of all sorts of people, who, including the naysayers, all sorts of stuff, and that was not an easy thing to stomach. But actually, when you're living permanently with a lot of other people, you have to learn to do things largely their way. And so, as an African boy, I absolutely understood about doing things the African way. However, I had to tell you, Alan, that when I was in the church procession, when that cathedral was reopened after being significantly refurbished, there were 9 bishops there from around East Africa, and one of them, splendid man, Bishop Mohammad, he was walking next to me, and he said, "What gives you the right to be here?" And I said, "Well, I am an African boy." And he went bananas. He went crazy. He said, "No, you're not." And he shouted at me. And I said, "We'll have a conversation later." Unfortunately, the bishop of Zanzibar stepped in. he had that conversation. And afterwards there was this thing about recognising that he had overstepped the mark, and he needed to get into the 21st century. It was a lovely moment, actually. But it also told me it was a very kind of idea to say that I was an African boy, when people didn't understand. Languages can be a problem, as I told you, but it wasn't the case in this case, where we started off with 3 groups that didn't speak each other's languages, but they would also always use each other's languages in some way. So those 3 languages that I talked about, English, Swahili, and Arabic, are the 3 national languages in Tanzania, and they are the universal trade languages of that area. So as I said, Kiswahili has some very basic words in its lexicon, and very many concepts that simply don't exist in their thinking, but that they can get from us. So if I tell you that, for example, days of the week, you didn't recognise 7-day periods, so suddenly it was weeks. We took the word week. In Swahili it is now wiki. Nothing to do with Wikipedia. But it was Arabic that became embedded in their words in Swahili. And so they have their Thursday, which is Alamisi. Their Friday is Juma. And then all the other words, all the other days of the week, are Juma Muslim. Lili, Jumata, Jumina, Jumatan, which is Juma plus 1, Juma plus 2. So they get that from the past. I can remember those. They have words like their greetings, so they say salam. They have a word that's similar to that, which is about safety, and that is salam. And that's again from Arabic. And finally, I discovered words that I didn't know at the time were Arabic words, but I picked it up when I was working in Saudi, which is the word kitab, which is kitab in Arabic. English contributed words in almost a comic way. Of course, they didn't have hospitals out in the African villages. So we introduced this phrase hospital, this word hospital. And you can probably guess what it is in Swahili. Correct, hospitality. We introduced biscuits to them, and they are known as biscuiti. And there's a reason for this. They could have just had to say hospital and biscuiti. But every word in Swahili ends in a vowel. It's the only language where that isn't the case. So they adopted these words easily, provided that it ended in a vowel. And we gave them a certain amount of grammatical structure as well, which is maybe a good idea, or maybe not. But it can be very difficult in other languages to understand what people are talking about. Chinese is a good example, Mandarin, where they don't have anything like our grammatical structure. And then from Hindi and others in the South Asia, there is, specifically in Arabic, I'm not sure, there is the word gai, which means basically any kind of vehicle. And so that has become the standard word for any kind of vehicle out there. So you're beginning to see this family of people who are different to look at from different backgrounds, but actually they connect with each other very easily. That's very helpful. It was also helpful, finally, that Zanzibar is a semi-autonomous state within Tanzania. In 1964, it became part of this new country called Tanzania, the other part being Tanganyika. And I grew up in Tanganyika, but then it became Tanzania. And that provides the island's residents with a sense of common identity, distinct from the mainlanders. So they recognize that they're Tanzanians, but they are different. They are Zanzibar Tanzanians. I go back to my earlier suggestion about locating Zanzibar on the map. And this feels a bit like Scotland, doesn't it? part of one country, rather proud of the singular identity. Where do I go? The great thing about it, and the reason I'm talking, is I have never seen a country where people work so well together. There are interesting bits and pieces that I haven't even mentioned. This cathedral, the Anglican Cathedral, is right next to the biggest market in Zanzibar. It's the everything market. It's like the people's supermarkets there. Everything from fish and meat and vegetables and so on to clothing and so on. And the schools are in there, and right there in this place called Kunazini is that cathedral. And guess what else is there? Yes, you've probably spotted it. There's the minaret of the local mosque, and that backs onto the cathedral because it's a great place to be, right next door to the market. And so there is that going on, but there is respect for the other cultures there. So this is a building of a kind I've never seen anywhere else, so I'm not sure what kind of architecture it claims to be. But I can tell you what its main doors are. And they are distinctly Arabic doors. And that was done for a purpose. It was to say, we understand we're part of a different community, do come in. Down here, there's a wonderful thing, which is the frame of the main door of what was probably a palace on the waterfront that is now a museum. And there is this tradition in the Arab parts of Zanzibar that the doorways at the top have a little panel with a thing called a dua carved in there, which is a little sort of prayer welcome statement. And I thought that this thing was a dua. But fortunately we have at the National Racing Museum here, we have a Pakistani girl who also is, in addition to Urdu, speaks Arabic, which she learned because of the Quran. And I showed her this and said, translate that for me, if you can. Very artistically done, may not be possible. And she said to me, it's not a dua. This is simply saying, the House of Wonders, which is the name of the great museum. And this is the museum shop. But here is this rather scrubby, I picked these up, or you can see them later, looking Catholic cathedral. I've explained why it's not, it's actually very fine, but it's right there in the midst of Stone Town, surrounded by tiny streets. And then here you get this sort of thing that I see in many places, but never in a place like in Africa like that. It's families going out for tea by the beach. You can see that those people are all black, so they are of African stock, but they are all Muslim as well. And the downs go past, and then here there is something for which I must give credit to the Catholic community. This is a meeting here at Zanzibar Catholic Cathedral, and it's their equivalent of this organisation of ours, the Interfaith Organisation. And it was a big meeting, and they're all standing there together, and I'll just read you as my closing thing what they have said here. Peace is the wish of everyone who loves. The above picture is a peace-building group in Zanzibar, including religious communities. I need some more of that colour. Religious leaders from Christians and Muslims. This is an instrument for peace and maintaining. As it is said, no peace without dialogue, and no dialogue without love. All systems and all people need peace. Foreigners, as well as indigenous, all want peace wherever they're living or doing their business of life. All together, we can make and maintain peace. In Zanzibar, this instrument brings people together in all situations, regardless of their belief. Humanity first, then other things will follow later. I couldn't have said it any better. Thanks for this.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You know what? First week I was speaking about Zanzibar. I was sitting there and imagining myself to be outside the hotel canvas by the beach and enjoying the beautiful turquoise waters of Zanzibar. It was bringing me a lot of fond memories. And that's one of the places I would like to go back again and again and again. And there's a special charm about that place, which unless you don't experience it yourself, you cannot describe it in words. So thank you for that. Anyway, hallelujah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ya ayyuhan nas, inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha wa ja'alnakum shu'uban wa qabaila lita'arafu inna akramakum 'inda Allahi atqakum. وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أفشوا السلام وأطعموا الطعام وصلوا الأرحام وصلوا بالليل والناس نيام تدخلوا الجنة بسلام. First and foremost, I would like to thank Alan and the organizers of today's event for inviting me and giving me an opportunity to share some of my thoughts on the issue of peaceful coexistence. As the theme of the program is titled East East West, I would like to quote a saying by the famous British author poet Rev'd who said, "The East is the East, and the West is the West, and the twain shall never meet." Whilst this might have been accurate some years ago, the reality is now that we are living in a global village where no one civilization can claim to be completely isolated from the rest of the world. As human beings, it can be argued that one of the most significant contributing factors that affect the attitude and subsequently the behavior of a human being is this belief or otherwise in the existence of a creator of the universe and a continuation of life after this life, the prospect of accountability of our actions, and finally whether we will be placed with the mercy of the Creator and be admitted into a place of eternal bliss and happiness. Unlike millions of people before us and millions of people after us, some of the key questions that all human beings have asked at different places in their life are the simple ones, supposedly. Who are we? Where do we come from? Where do we go from here? And dependent upon the answer that you give to these basic questions, it will form your worldview. And if you believe in the existence of a Creator, then the only overarching question that remains is, how do I need to behave in this world to get the best of this life and the best of the hereafter? Now these core beliefs are shared by some of the world's well-known faith traditions: Christianity, Buddhism, Sikhs, some parts of Hinduism, albeit with differences to the detail as to who will be raised or not eventually, i.e. who will get salvation in the hereafter. And despite the fact that we have come a long way from the old stone age and entering into the space age, and man trying to reach Mars, and the advancement of technology unthinkable just 100 years ago. But we as human beings still have some major challenges that we have to deal with. Whether it is climate change, environmental crisis, racism, gender discrimination, etc., etc. The question that remains is it possible for human beings who, despite having some basic common needs such as air, food, water, shelter, love, etc., but having different ideologies, a variety of cultures, diversity in diet, etc., is it possible for us as human beings to live peacefully in coexistence? Now, some people have blamed religions to be a cause of so much conflict in the world of past and present, and I've suggested that we should do away with religion so the world will be a peaceful place. Whilst I would concede that throughout human history there have been people who have used or misuse religion in order to further war and aggression, I still believe that a good, balanced, contextual understanding of one's faith can prevent many conflicts. Let me share with you some examples from the Quran and some of the traditions of the Prophet peace be upon him that might help us work towards this peaceful coexistence that we all strive for, the majority of the people of the world. The first verse that I recited to you today, it starts by saying, Ya ayyuhan nas, O human being, inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha. I have created you from a male and a female. وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا. And I have divided you into tribes and nations so that you can recognize one another. إِنَّ أَكْرَمَكُمْ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ أَتْقَاكُمْ. And verily in the sight of Allah, only the person who is most conscious of Him can get nearest to Him. In the same way, we have another verse in the Quran. It says, وَمَا كَانَ رَبُّكَ لِيُهْلِكَ الْقُرَىٰ بِظُلْمٍ وَأَهْلُهَا مُصْلِحُونَ. And your sustainer will never ever destroy a community, even if they are being zulm. Zulm here means ideological differences or wrongs. So long as their behavior with one another is okay. Meaning that God is all powerful. If all the people of the world decide not to believe in His existence, if all the people of the world have divided opinions about the nature of the God, etc., but as long as we did not hurt one another physically, verbally, etc., the world will still survive. The Quran also tells us, وَلَا تُجَادِلُوا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ إِلَّا بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. That if we as Muslims want to talk to people of the earlier scriptures, then we should talk to them in the best possible manner. We'll have discussions, we'll have disputes, etc., on issues of theology, etc. But we need to follow the ethics in a civilized manner. The Quran also tells us, وَلَا تَسُبُّوا الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ وَيَسُبُّوا اللَّهَ عَدْوًا بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ. That a true Muslim should never insult or use derogatory words about any other person's faith, no matter how, divided it might be in terms of their opinion. The Prophet, peace be upon him, also said, يَرْحَمُوا مَنْ فِي الْأَرْضِ يَرْحَمُوا مَنْ فِي السَّمَاءِ. Show compassion to the peoples of the world, and God will show compassion to you. So some of these verses and some of these traditions suggest that it is possible, theoretically, for people of different traditions to have a peaceful coexistence. And we have an early case study in the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that in the 5th year of his prophethood, when political conditions in Makkah were not so conducive to the Muslim community, he allowed a group of Muslims to migrate to the Christian country Ethiopia, including his son-in-law and his daughter, who migrated to Ethiopia, and the Prophet wrote a personal letter to the king of Ethiopia, who was a Christian. And he said, I am sending with you some of my believers after them. And the Prophet instructed his believers, leave the Ethiopians alone, so long as they leave you alone. And we have this early community of believers residing in a predominantly Christian country under a Christian king, but living peacefully side by side. And I had the opportunity to go to Ethiopia a few years ago, and I saw even till today that Muslims, Christians living side by side, churches and mosques, going to the farms together, sometimes eating together. Yes, they would worship separately, but the fact that they could still maintain peaceful coexistence is a good indication that it can be done practically. Also, a vision that the Prophet, peace be upon him, had very early on in his mission was that when a group of believers came to him and said, but look what the people are doing to us. They are hurting us, they are ridiculing us, they are trying to kill us. The Prophet, peace be upon him, in order to instill courage and the vision that he had of a society, and he said to the people, yes, these are the ground realities, but I can see a time where it could be possible for a woman laden with gold to travel on her own all the way from Sana'a to Hadramaut, two cities in Yemen, where she would have fear of no one except God. There was so much peace and security in the world at that time that this is the vision of a society that the Prophet had very early on in his mission. We also find that one of the first spiritual advisors to the Prophet after he received his revelation was a follower of the early scripture, a Christian by the name of Warqa ibn Nawfal. So when the Prophet, peace be upon him, did not understand what the revelations were, his wife took him to her cousin Warqa, who was a follower of the Christian faith, and Warqa gave him the first spiritual advice. Here I think there's a lesson for all of us. That yes, the ground reality of the world, what we see in the media on a daily basis, we become despondent, disillusioned. We sometimes lose hope, we become pessimistic, we have ground realities. But at the same time, on a local level, these type of events that we are organized today, maybe we can organize more of these type of events. And let's start talking meaningfully. Let's look at our differences, but let's discuss them in a civilized manner. And the irony is this, that so many people killed and hurt people in the name of God. So many people kill and hurt people in the name of God, but the victims also turn to God. The stakes are so high. And I think as people of faith, maybe we need to up the ante and do a bit more. More of these type of events, let's talk, let's discuss, let's have open discussion. And I think the program that we have today is a good way forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So firstly, I would also like to thank the Newmarket Interfaith Forum for allowing me to come on behalf of the Baha'i community to speak and share with you some thoughts on the theme of East means West, which is in fact a very topical theme for the whole Baha'i world community this year. And as to why that is, it will become clear in the presentation. So I want to share with you the story of Abdul, who in this picture is appearing on the very left in a long Persian coat with a white headdress. I want to take you back to the east, in fact to what was known in the 1900s as Palestine, and to the prison city of Akka. This was a very well-known and harsh prison city of the Ottoman Empire, and hosted all the most terrible criminals and outcasts of the time. When the family of Abdul were sent to this city as their last and final abode after many years of banishment in Baghdad and Turkey, Abdul was only 24 years old. Abdul had already been living a life of banishment from his homeland and imprisonment from the age of 9 with his family, for no other reason than his father Baha'u'llah bringing a new message of peace and brotherhood of mankind from God. This message in Iran had attracted thousands to his call. So he was faced with bitter persecution from the authorities in the Persian government, who did not want his influence to spread in their land. The picture at the bottom is the prison cell in which the family were confined for 2.5 years, until eventually the local authorities realized that this group of people are not criminals at all, but have the love and interest and they were released, but were to live in the confines of the city. Abdul Baha was the master of social action. He cared for the people. For 40 years in Akka, his life consisted of visiting the sick, helping the poor, tending the needs of the people around him. It was only after the Young Turks Revolution in the year 1908 that Abdul Baha was finally released as a prisoner. He was then 64 years old. Upon his release from captivity, and despite his advanced years and his failing health from the harsh conditions he had endured, Abdul Baha embarked on a series of epic journeys to the West. He taught that Baha'u'llah's purpose was to unite all mankind, and that he had come to transform the whole character of humanity. The essential feature of the Baha'i faith is the oneness of humankind. Abdul Baha gave hundreds of talks and addresses in all settings and interacted with all groups of people, whether high-ranking or ordinary. And he particularly sought the company of those who were suffering and in need of help and support. There is a picture of Abdul Baha here being awarded a knighthood by the British Empire because during the First World War he supervised the collection of grain so that the whole population in the north of Palestine who were facing famine could be fed. In his travels to Europe and America, Abdul Baha met with many prominent people. the world with the utmost truthfulness, uprightness, faithfulness, kindness, goodwill, and friendliness. Make peace with all the world. Love everyone. Serve everyone. All are the servants of God. God has created all. He provided for all. He is kind to all. Therefore must we be kind to all. In this illumined age, that which is confirmed is the oneness of the world of humanity. Every soul who serveth this oneness will undoubtedly be assisted and confirmed. The most important principle of divine philosophy is the oneness of the world of humanity, the unity of mankind, the bond conjoining east and west, the tie of love which blends human hearts. Therefore, it is our duty to put forth our greatest efforts and summon all our energies in order that the bonds of unity and accord may be established among mankind. We all, the Eastern with the Western nations, must strive day and night with heart and soul to achieve this high ideal, to cement the unity between all the nations of the earth. Every heart then will be refreshed, all eyes will be opened, the most wonderful power will be given, the happiness of humanity will be assured. All religions teach that we should love one another, that we should seek out our own shortcomings before we presume to condemn the faults of others, that we must not consider ourselves superior to our neighbors. Who are we that we should judge? How should we know who in the sight of God is the most upright man? God's thoughts are not like our thoughts. How many men have seen saint-like their friends have fallen into the greatest humiliation? The day is coming when all the religions of the world will unite. For in principle, they are one already. There is no need for division, seeing that it is only the outward forms that separate them. And finally, do not think the peace of the world an ideal impossible to attain. Nothing is impossible to the divine benevolence of God. If you desire with all your heart friendship with every race on earth, your thought, spiritual and positive, will spread. It will become the desire of others, growing stronger and stronger until it reaches the minds of all men.
It's really good to be here this afternoon. I'll just tell you who I am. I'm James Hurst. I'm a deacon in the Catholic Church near Waitrose, and I'm speaking on behalf of the churches together in Newmarket and district. And it is so wonderful to have heard already today that what it's all about is the worship of God and the service of everybody else.
regardless. And what's lovely here is that we all have faith in God. So here is a little story about what the churches together did during the lockdowns and how it happened. Because I lived that story, and if anybody wasn't sure that God existed, by the end of the year there was a lot of proof, certainly for me. We got together to provide food parcels for hungry families who would normally get a preschool meal if they were at school. 3,000 boxes of cereal, 10,000 pints of milk, 22,000 potatoes, and 20,000 sausages, most of them from houses around the world, amongst many other things. And we produced just under 3,000 food parcels in over 33 weeks, while schools were not open to all children. And that was from April last year until April this year. We helped altogether 179 families, over 600 children, and 250, a little bit more, of their parents. So why and how did this happen? Well, following the Catholic social teaching principle of preferential option for the poor, our little group of people at the Catholic Church were looking for something more to do in Newmarket. And we found that the local evangelical church, the Newmarket Community Church, were cooking lunches during the school holidays for the families of children who, if they were at school, would be getting preschool meals. And they were keen to share their experience. So off our team went to peel spuds, wash up, and learn the importance of administration and legal process. And together, we were all set to offer a free lunch and some games for the kids for 4 days over the 2 weeks of the Easter holidays last year. And through the local, 7 local schools, we advertised to all families on the preschool meal register, and we had 13 families lined up, about 50 families. And then lockdown. We couldn't let them down, so we thought, let's do food parcels instead. After all, it would only be 3 weeks. Do you remember that? Now word spread and it grew. By the 4th week we were running out of money. And the numbers had doubled to 25 families. Happily, an admin error in one of the big schools meant that the emails inviting the families to have a food parcel didn't just go to the preschool meal families, but to everyone, including some very wealthy people. And I woke up to an email on Monday morning saying, I want to donate 100 quid to you. And that was lovely. We had a bit of a to and fro. And by the end of that week, he and his friends and his businesses had deposited over £3,500 into our bank account. Absolutely wonderful. You couldn't have made it up. Then the Newmarket Festival got involved, and they very generously supported us and kept us going for most of last year. And in due course, there was a National Catholic Fund, the Albert Gouvet Foundation, which gave us a grant, and that's kept us going for most of this year. But we needed more volunteers, and so we asked our Anglican friends to join us. And under the Churches Together and Newmarket District umbrella, we rose to 75 volunteers. The busiest week was in July, when we had 97 families. Of course, they came and went as their fortunes varied, and we tried to keep the same volunteers picking, packing, and delivering to the same families, so that we built up a picture of what's going on and made sure that we met, as much as you could, their needs. And as I said, people came and went as their requirements changed. Some were getting back into work, some had other things happening, and new people were coming. But we recognised about 30 families roughly who were with us for most of the time. The average cost per person was £3.50 a week. And we got discounts from many shops, and we benefited from fair share, which I'm sure you've heard about. But we had to pick up the stuff from Ipswich because all their lorries were busy. So Godolphin very kindly lent us a driver and a van for 8 weeks, and they would go down to Ipswich, pick up the stuff, go and unload it. And then after 8 weeks, they said quite reasonably, well, look, I'm sorry, we're going back into business. You can't have the van anymore. We said, that's fine, that's fine. So my wife and a friend drove down to Ipswich to pick up the stuff, and they said, what are you doing? I said, well, I've come up to pick up the stuff from Newmarket. Oh, no, he was there an hour ago. So he completely ignored his bosses, and for the next 18 weeks, he took their van, their fuel, and their time, which he was being paid, to go and do that work, which was wonderful. I'm very happy to say he's still employed by them. And I'm sure one day he'll be their managing director. So, a lovely story. As word spread, more and more people were helping. Pat Horse Group, who has some lovely pubs in the area, provided great fresh vegetables at a time when it was difficult to get them. The Bell at Kennet came along board with cereal and cheese, and a wonderful organisation that I'd never heard of called the Rural Coffee Caravan, which was basically taking vans of coffee right to country places, donating a slow cooker for every single one of the, well then 120 families in one room. Absolutely amazing. Now, as society opens up, we've returned with the Newmarket Community Church to providing hot lunches and games on the school holidays. So at Whitsun half term, we had a wonderful picnic outside the church, and then for the 5 weeks over the summer holidays, we had a growing number of families coming in, kids playing, mum sitting down with a cup of coffee whilst we cooked. But on the very first occasion, one of the families said that they would like to cook for us. And so they came up with a wonderful curry. We refused. We made sure that they didn't pay for it, but they did the work with a bit of help from us. And so that was another lovely story. We honestly pray that we won't have to return to food parcels again. It is difficult when people are in lockdown. They were happy to have something to do. When they're not and they're busy, it's difficult to get enough volunteers. But what we will continue to do is work together as the Christian churches in Newmarket for the people of Newmarket. We're supporting Open Door, which you may have heard of, that has a hostel for young people and operates a food bank. We'll continue to run a lunch on Christmas Day, again at the Catholic Church, when we're allowed to. And we'll continue to organise events like the drive-in Christmas Carol service and the Walk of Witness on Good Friday. And so, just a very quick snapshot of what the churches together have done in Newmarket, and the way in which we concentrate not on what divides us, but on what we have in common, the love of God and the service of our neighbours. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum, which means by the time I think by now you know what salam means. Peace be with you all. My name is Sarwat, and I've come with Farooq. He's my husband. Blessed to have him as my husband, and my child who's not feeling quite right, but she's there. She's right there. But good to be here. Thanks for having us. Thank you for inviting us. And when Farooq told me that I was going to speak, I asked him, where? What about? And then he showed me this program, East, East, West. And I thought, why don't I talk about a Muslim woman in the UK and how it feels to be here? Okay, so I've got a little presentation ready on this topic. Can you hear me first? Okay, is that better? I'm pretty loud. Ask Farooq. Ask him I'm very loud. Okay, right. So I have these 4 concepts that I want to just explore with you, of course, okay? And I will also give credit to my teacher who used to constantly talk about school now are exploring this word assumption. Why do we assume things about people? So just as Sister Simmin said, let's not make judgments about anybody. Okay? And if you all understood that, I mean, this is a fantastic group to come together here to understand each other. But there are many people out there who have barriers, who have kind of, ideas that are not, going further than what they think is right. So keeping that in mind, let's talk about this topic. Right, so if we read about migration, I don't know if many people can see that, or I read out the definition. And of course, I relied on Google a lot last night when I was doing this. So migration is human migration involves the movement of people from one place to another with intentions of settling permanently or temporarily at a new location. Okay? So keeping that in mind, Muslim women, first of all, let's not assume that they were all migrants. Okay? So if you look up forgotten women who built British Islam, you will see that there were Muslim women even ages ago here. Okay? So let's not assume that all Muslim women have migrated. Secondly, they come from a very diverse background. It's fantastic to see you that you are actually in Zanzibar. Did not think of that, okay? Here we are, we come from very different backgrounds and for very different reasons. Okay? So for example, we came, or not me, but others came as wives, as mothers, as sisters, but some actually came in as professionals. Some actually went back. Okay? So let's not just assume that. Okay. When we talk about migration, of course, let's also not forget that some who came here, maybe to study, when they went back, they also had still, the challenges were still the same. So women, as a woman, female, already there are challenges. And I'm not saying that the men don't have challenges. These days, men have more challenges as well. Okay? So, currently in the UK, you will find women who are born here. Okay? So there are no more that they have migrated. That concept is maybe now, just recently, about a month ago, there are more women coming in. But to some extent, there are women here who are born here. However, they are traditionally brought up. So there are women who are born here, just like Farooq has just left, I think he doesn't want to hear me anymore. But he's brought up here, but again, very traditionally. Whereas I came from India, city called Bombay, if you know about Bombay, is quite advanced, okay? So when I came here, I thought I'm going to this very advanced country, and I came here to study. But I found it quite maybe years behind somewhere, especially when I met my community. And of course, there's a reason for that, which I will not be able to cover in 15 minutes. Okay, when communities get up from a location and they settle in a new location, they bring with them just this closed culture. They've not necessarily migrated or advanced in knowledge and in ideas. Okay, so they were brought up from that straight, picked up, for example, in Mirpur in Pakistan, and brought here in Oldham or Manchester, and the entire community has stuck there. Okay, so these are concepts we need to understand. Okay, maybe the earlier women did not work, but what were the reasons why they did not work? So I'm referring to many such reports that we work with Muslim women and unemployment. Why are they unemployed? Why do they not, kind of contribute to the labor market? And these kind of questions. But hang on, did women always work? Was it in all societies? Or do we look back a few years even here, in history in England, in Britain, in the UK, and see that women actually had traditional roles? So these are, I think, more than giving you information, I'm going to leave you with a lot of questions here, okay? Alright. So it happened in other societies too. All we have to do is look up history. The second concept of integration. Now, integration means the intermixing of people who were previously segregated. That's the definition, okay, on Google. Let's put it within the context of Muslim women. And I can't see where my glasses. Right. So, the barriers, integration, we're talking about integration, okay? Skills, language, being migrant, female and Muslim. This is a triple paralysis practice that is mentioned in one of the reports by the William Foundation, this just shows that it's not easy. It's not easy. I'm not saying, I mean, what probably you see here is somebody who has had enough rebellion in her life to be where I am. Okay? It's not easy. So I just want to give you that idea that it's not easy. Okay. What are the barriers? Religious barriers maybe? Now, or is it religious barriers? Does the religion actually give me a second place as a citizen? Does the religion actually give me a second place after a man? It's a question. I have the answer, but I'm going to leave you with the questions, okay? Right. Interpretation of the sacred text. Who interpreted that? Who were the people who gave me the guidance to say that the Quran actually says that? Where does that information come from? Of course, there are many women who are now directly studying the Quran, the text, and coming up with answers for themselves, okay? Again, I'm searching. My husband is helping me to search to some extent. Sometimes the answers are given, sometimes the answers are not yet given. But that's where I am. That's my personal search. We also have lack of role models. Okay? So if you Google search kind of successful women in the Muslim community, you will find names. So there are women in politics, there are women in many other fields. But sometimes that role model doesn't fit me, to my understanding of who I should be and who I should follow. So there's a confusion even there. There are many successful, powerful Muslim women, but not all role models will fit my understanding of who I should be. So that's where I am. When it comes to support, the biggest support that a Muslim woman would need would be with childcare. That's a big struggle. And the question is, if I leave my child with somebody, how do I know that the child is getting the upbringing that I want my child to have, for example? Traditionally, the role of a woman in Islam would be that her first job would be to be like a home, looking after the home. Mainly her traditional role would be that. So, there is a reason for that. If a child is not brought up by myself, then somebody else is bringing that child up. So, for example, the society overall, a nursery, a school. So, the ideas that are given to my child, for example, are coming from somewhere else but me. Am I sure where I'm sending my child? So, my child goes to a church school, for example, in Leicester, and I love it because they talk about faith, and this is what I want my child to have. So, I'm very happy. So, there will be people coming up to me and saying, why did you send Fatima to a church school? Because they talk about faith, and that's sufficient for me, because then at home I back it up more. Okay? So, as a mother, my child's first school is me. It's me. Madrasa, a place where a child learns. Okay? Now, in our community, a lot of children are going to a madrasa or an Islamic community or Islamic center to learn about religion. But really, the child learns at home. And this is a message I want to give to the Muslim community as a teacher of a madrasa myself. That parents have the prime responsibility and duty to teach them about who you want them to be. You cannot expect the teachers to do that job, whether it's the mainstream school or the religious school. Okay? Now, how much integration am I expected to have? What level of integration am I expected to have? So, you mentioned you were born in Zanzibar and you have an affection to that place. I was born in India, I have some sort of affection to that place. When I gave up my Indian citizenship in that church where I had the ceremony, I skipped a beat and I said, okay, so my loyalty now changes from India to the UK. But then I thought, it's okay, I am still the same person. The whole world is my home. What I'm really focused on is being a good human being, a good contributing citizen. And I am, trust me, I am trying my best to help the communities. We do a lot of work and I will hopefully continue to do that till I can. So that's what I I want to be? I want to be a contributing participant, like a citizen that is helpful, useful in many ways. How much integration am I supposed to have? That's a question. Third concept is assimilation. Now let's focus on this definition. Assimilation is the process whereby individuals or groups of differing ethnic heritage are absorbed into the dominant culture of a society. So, this is the host community. We have a dominant culture, and I am supposed to assimilate in there, yeah? So, let's talk about that. What is dominant culture? Do we have a dominant culture now, or is it all mixed up? Okay, it's a question. Fish and chips. Sure, I love it. But I love it. It's the most amazing basic food that we can get anywhere. As long as it's not beer batter, I'm happy. So I have assimilated, but I have some boundaries, right? Sports, sure. I never did sports in my life. Not because I didn't like it, but because I was brought up in an overly populated area where there was no way to run. Too much traffic, and there was no park. I never went to a park. I never did any sports. Okay? But if I show interest in sports now, let's see what the reaction would be. Okay, standing in the queue, which is British culture. Sure, I would like to do that. Because in Saudi Arabia, that's where probably you saw it, that the women had a separate queue. Why was that? If women had no equality, if women had no respect, why did women never had to stand in a queue? They would come in, even though the black buyers get what they had and go. The men would still be waiting in the queue. So queue, it's a British culture. Right, being on time. I did a job in my life that if I did not come on time, I would miss the bus. So I had to come on time. But yes, this is something we can learn. So yes, assimilation, I will take everything that is good, but with certain things that I can't do, for whatever reason. For example, fish and chips with beer batter. Yeah, I can't do that. Clothing. Not everyone wears hijab. Let's just get that right. Okay, now everybody who calls themselves Muslims may not be wearing a hijab, and we have no right to judge them. Now, for some, this is too modern. For some, this is too conservative. What is the limit you have set is entirely up to you. What's your understanding of modest clothing is entirely up to you. There is a report, by the way, that I referred to. Were you forced by your family members to wear hijab? Most of them will say no. They choose to wear hijab with their own understanding. So let's not assume that they are kind of oppressed and subservient and that they were forced. Okay? Going out, first of all, working is also a choice. Okay? Now, if I was given a prime role to make sure that I am bringing up the children the way I want to, which is also part of the Jewish culture, for example, or traditional culture, then if I'm doing that and I'm not going out to work, that's probably my choice. Okay? But if I have to, then I go out to work. Okay? When I go out to work, am I allowed to go out with my colleagues for an evening kind of get together? Question mark. It's a question. Okay? How far can I go? How many hours can I go? What time is my home time? What time do I have to come back home? It's a question. So, can Muslim women assimilate completely? No. Let's respect those questions. Okay. Religion is now made up with so many different diverse cultures, and I had my Indian curry written on that. I didn't change my slide. Sorry. My Indian curry was right here from last night, and yet we spoke about Indian food so many times today. It is part of our culture. No matter which town we go to, the way we find Muslims, and this is what Farooq does, he looks for an Indian curry restaurant. Because then he knows there might be some place to pray there. So it's there in every town. Participation, and the explanation of this term is the state of being related to a larger whole, okay? Which means it's a process during which individuals, groups and organizations are consulted about or have the opportunity to become actively involved in a project or an activity or being a citizen, okay? The questions I have is, what sense of belonging do I feel here? Do I feel I belong here? And that will depend on how I feel. My participation will improve depending on how I feel. Praise be to God. The way I was brought up, my father gave me that, go, do it, go. He, by the way, told me, don't go to the kitchen. Don't waste your time. Study. Because when you have to cook, you will manage. And whatever you want to eat is available in the restaurant. Right? So I was not encouraged to go to the kitchen. He told me to go and study. Okay? But that was my father. Okay? My question would be, how can I contribute to society? How can I be helpful? These are questions that people should ask. Do I consider myself as an active citizen? Or am I expecting someone else to do things for me? Okay? Do I understand my rights? But more my responsibility. So rights and responsibilities are coming together here, yeah? How can I make my voice heard? Thank you for giving me the mic. Okay? Especially for the young. So there are many women, I'm not saying only Muslim, this is a cultural thing that sometimes they're not allowed to speak, okay? Or speak their mind as they say. Yeah? Okay. So my last slide is, give us opportunities. So here it is, womeninsports.org. Now why am I emphasizing on sports? No, I'm not. This is just one thing that I picked up. There are many such fields where women are there. So for example, I know for a fact that Fatima's classmate's mom is a police officer. That's one. She's a Muslim, she wears a hijab, and when I first met her, I was like, wow, I'm so proud of you. Okay? So there are Muslim women in the army. I haven't searched the name, but they are in politics, they are teachers. So when I started reading papers on Muslim communities here, I found that there was only 1% of teachers that were Muslims in the state schools. Only 1% or even less. So we encourage now our young kind of females and men to become more and more, take up the PGCE and become teachers. Okay, so here is all this, women are there in sports, women are there they're even driving buses, by the way, which was not ever seen before, for example, yeah? So very recently Saudi Arabia has allowed women to drive, but I've seen Muslim women driving buses, trucks, whatever you call it, yeah? Okay. What I leave you with is a question, I don't know what the answer is, but women, Muslim women, they need empowerment, but they need it through education. But there is a sensitivity that we need to be careful about, okay? We cannot expect them to integrate and assimilate and forget about who they are. They have, I'm embedded with culture, I'm embedded with ideas that will never go away. I may waver for a while, I may get attracted for a while, but there is something that will pull me back to who I am. So if we can provide that, if we can support that, that would be great. And giving opportunities, hopefully, Muslim women will become equal participating citizens. Now, there was a paper I came across by somebody called Shaikh Farooq, and she has written this paper. I'm not going to read everything, of course, but she says, despite barriers, it is empowering to be a Muslim woman in Britain. Okay? One of the paragraphs, I'm going to quote her, she says, Muslim women are one of the most disadvantaged groups in Britain. They have the poorest health, live in the poorest housing. I don't, but I'm just saying, this is the statistics, okay? Have the highest unemployment rates. I am unemployed, trust me. I have worked all my life, from the age of 18, okay? Highest unemployment rates and face discrimination on multiple levels because of their gender, ethnicity, religion, and the way they dress. They also face internal problems. I can vouch for that. I can tell you it happens at every level. Okay? Okay. Which is linked to their culture and sometimes interpretation of the religious text as well. In addition to all this, their bodies have become battlegrounds for extremists on both sides. On one side, you have a rise in religious extremism, and conservative Muslims are criticizing women like this lady who does not wear a hijab or a headdress, okay? And on the other hand, we have the right-wing politicians are telling Muslim women who choose to cover that they are not integrated enough. So people are more concerned about what's on top of my head rather than what's inside my head. Give me a break. Please give me a break. Okay, that's all I have to say. If you have any questions, shoot.
All praise be to God. I say peace and salutations to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him and his companions and his. So, I have to first thank Brother Chairman Alan for giving the opportunity to come and speak for everyone. So, from the theme, these verse, I would like to just touch upon the topic because I don't think we have that much long. Just touch upon the topic. Touch upon the topic of Quran, which is the Book of Allah, Book of God, and how it affects and how it leads the Muslims in this country and how they can mix with everyone else. So firstly we need to understand in what situation and what was the scene when the Quran was revealed. So firstly to understand why revelation is needed for us. So from the beginning of time, from the time of the Prophet Adam and his wife Hajar, which we call Adam and Eve, when they lived in this world, to live in this world we need guidance from God. A person to know what's right and wrong uses his five senses or he uses his intellect. But these things is not enough. We also need guidance from above. So this is where the Quran comes into play, and all the other books which we know as the Bible, as the Hebrews they had the Torah, and as the Jews had they had the Zabur and all these books. So when the Prophet ﷺ, when he was in Arabia, there was a time of ignorance. There was a lot of jahiliyyah. There was all these different beliefs that they had. So when God wanted to speak to mankind, the Prophet ﷺ was used as a means. And he's known as Sayyid al-Mursaleen, he's known as the Khatim al-Nabiyyin, the last of the messengers. So out of every single prophet that has come, our prophet we believe is the last one. Before him was Isa, before him was so many. So we believe Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the last. And I would just like to touch upon his life. When he was born an orphan, his father passed away before he was born. So he grew up in a life of poverty, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had it very hard in his life. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam became a businessman, and he was known as Al-Amin, the trustworthy, and he was known as As-Sadiq, the truthful one. And he also used to go around and he used to have a group called Al-Fujul. He used to go around the community, and any problem anyone had, they would help, and they would fix. Like anyone needed anything fixing, windows fixing, all these other things, they would help. And because he was an orphan, he used to go around, he used to show love to all the orphanages, and he used to give mental support to everyone in the community. So he was known, and he was a very well versed person, and he was a very loved person in the community. When the Prophet ﷺ reached the age of 40, God decided to use him as a means to spread the message of Islam. So once the Prophet ﷺ was in the mountain, he was in seclusion and he was in meditation. And the angel Gabriel came to him, which we believe, which we Muslims call him Jibreel. So he came to him and he said to him, Iqra, which means to read. Then the Prophet ﷺ replied, I cannot read, I do not know how to read. Then the angel once again said, Oh Muhammad, read, Iqra. And the Prophet ﷺ said, I cannot read. Then the angel once again said, Iqra. And then he hugged him. And he said, Iqra wa rabbuka al-akram, alladhi اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق الإنسان من علق اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم الذي علم ما لم يعلم. Or read, Prophet, or read in the name of your Lord, اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق, the one who created man from a blood clot, as the sperm cell. Then he said, read, oh who you do not, the one that taught with the pen, and the one that taught the ones that do not know. So the Prophet ﷺ taught. So then the Prophet ﷺ was scared. He had an encounter with an angel. So he went home and he was shivering. So he went to his wife, and his wife and he said something, you will not cover me. He said it 3 times, and his wife covered him. And she said to him, what happened? And he to the story, and she said that she became Muslim. So this is how the first revelation started, and afterwards many other revelations came, and it led the Prophet ﷺ in every moment. He always told him what to do, anything happened, any questions that had, the questions would be answered through revelation. So there's so many incidents where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala consoles the Prophet. When he needed guidance, when he needed help, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would send revelation and he would console his Prophet. Once the Prophet a woman said to him, when there was no revelation coming for some time, a woman came to the Prophet and said, why is your Lord not sending you revelation? So the Prophet got very upset, and he was at home one day, and he was just thinking to himself, like, why has Allah actually left me? And the Prophet then Allah SWT revealed the verses وَالضُّحَى وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى مَا وَدَّعَكَ رَبُّكَ وَمَا قَلَى. And your Lord has definitely not left you. وَمَا قَلَى وَلَلْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَى وَلَسَوْفَ يُؤْتِيكَ رَبُّكَ فَتَرْضَى. That indeed Allah SWT will still give to you and you will be happy. And this made the Prophet very happy. So the Quran was a consult. He used to comfort the Prophet in hard times. And the Prophet before Prophet he was known as Al-Amin, and he was known as As-Sadiq, the truthful one, the trustworthy one. After he claimed prophethood and claimed that he was getting revelations from God, they completely boycotted him and the community that became Muslims because they couldn't understand what he was saying, which then made them later call him liar and everything. So they left him. They made him leave his home city, Makkah, which was such a city in the Arabian Peninsula where everyone would go. All over the Arabian Peninsula, everyone would travel. One time in 1 year, we pilgrimage called Hajj. So everyone around the whole world, around the whole Arabian Peninsula would come for this Hajj. And it was a moment of business where a lot of traders would come and they would exchange, and it was a big environment. And also, obviously, as we know, the Kaaba of Ibrahim alayhi salam, as we believe Abraham, he built is in Makkah. So Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was attached to this place. So when he was kicked out of his place, he was crying and he left. So then the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Allah guided him through all these struggles and everything. So the Quran was preserved. The Quran used to be written down in. He was preserved with leaves, because obviously at that time they had no paper. They used to write on leaves, they used to write on trees, you know, all these things, and they looked after the Quran to make sure that it wasn't, the revelation wasn't wasted. And at that time, in the Arabian Peninsula, the Arabs would memorize lineages up to 50, 60 lineages all the way up. And they would know their dad's name, they would know their dad's name, their dad's name, and they had very good memory. They would remember every single thing. So I saw that even their camels, they would remember the lineages of the camels, like 20, 30 generations up, and they would know which camel is which camel. So they had very good memory. They would remember couplets of Arabic poetry. They would remember. They had really good memory at that time. So to memorize the Quran was really easy for them. Even now today we see that so many youngsters, so many Muslims, they memorize the Quran. And this is a miracle of the Quran. You know how one book can be read so many times without getting bored. You know, I myself, I used to read comic books. Does anyone used to read comic books? You know, I used to read comic books, not books. I used to read this comic called Tintin. Yeah. So you can read one book once, twice, thrice, and then you get bored. But this book is such that you can read it again and again. I think probably the Bible is the same. You can read it again and again and you never get bored. You know, because this is the word of Allah, it's a miracle. You know, that God directly talked to mankind through this book. And when we read this book, we find comfort, we find how to live our life, how we can live day to day, how we can please God. And with this book is guidance. And you know, the beginning of the book, which is called the opening, Al-Fatiha, you know, we read it every day, 5 times a day, in the main Salah. We read it at least 25 times every day. And you know, no one has ever said change this, because you know, when something is true, you can say again and again and you won't be bored. So this is just a basic, I touched upon this. I think now when the students will come and read one by one, they will just read the book of Quran. They're my students, so they will memorize it and they will come and read. So I think one of them will come first. Abdul.
إله الناس من شر الوسواس الخناس